But I think one thing that's definitely overrated that a lot of people are having more of a conversation on is with all this information that's out there, people having this idea that getting their diet 10% better, which means, for them, like not having, which already maybe for somebody listening to this podcast would be super infrequent, like having a soda or eating, whatever junk food they crave at that time. What might be overrated, what I personally feel, is trying to get that last 10% instead of investing that energy into working out, better sleep, or in some cases, some people just need better community and friends so that they're actually happier and they have the energy to go pursue what their actual dreams are in life. What's your hot take on that?
I totally agree. And it's funny you say this because I've got a lot of friends who aren't medical and they're really getting into the biohacking space, right? And I think biohacking, apart from the name, I think we could probably come up with a better name. It's definitely introduced a number of things into common culture that perhaps would have been fringe or just completely unknown. Things like sauna, things like cold immersion therapy or cold water therapy and stuff, of which there are many benefits, I feel. But I think until you get to that stage, there are some fundamental basics that we need to get a hold of. And a lot of my friends, they'll spend exorbitant amounts of time getting to a hyperbaric oxygen chamber or, going to a cryo or taking a specific suite of different supplements. And you just think about the amount of time that we all have given to us in a 24-hour period. How could I optimize my body using the same pockets of time? Would I choose to go into the hyperbaric oxygen chamber? Only if I really had a significant inclination to do so, or I was treating something like a traumatic brain injury, where there is some scanty evidence. Would I opt to do that instead of exercise? Something that doesn't sound as sexy, but has incredible evidence base around the benefits to cardiovascular health, brain health, mental well-being, cognitive ability. I'm definitely going to be going for the exercise. And so I think, jumping ahead to the overrated elements, I think certainly some of those activities are overrated, whereas the underrated is things like exercise. And I ensure every single day there's at least 30 to 40 minutes spent exercising. It can be a whole bunch of different things. It could be flow, it could be HIIT training. It doesn't always need to require a gym. In fact, having a sort of like Swiss Army knife of activities you can do in your lounge is probably one of the best things that you can invest your time into doing. Like creating a smorgasbord of different workouts that you can do in your home without disturbing anyone and just using a mat or some simple equipment. Honestly, that's probably one of the best life hacks I have. I started doing this thing with my my videographer because I think one of the other things I think is getting into the mindset and identifying yourself as someone who exercises every day.
Right.
And I think that personal identity piece is part of the puzzle for a lot of people. Like I identify as someone who cooks well and cooks consistently every day. I identify as someone who exercises every day. I identify as someone who goes for a walk every day. And so those things will peter down into my activities on a week by week basis. And so I was chatting to my videographer and he was trying to get into exercise, and he's done this typical yo-yo exercising activity, like someone who will do a run for an hour a couple of times a week, and then by the next week they're like, I can't really be bothered, or like I'll do it tomorrow, and then ultimately you just put it off, and then you don't exercise anymore. I was like, well, what do you like doing? He's like, I like skipping. It's like, okay, well, what's the minimum amount of time you can spend exercising, skipping every day?
Is that like jumping rope, by the way?
Jumping rope, yeah,
sorry.
sorry.
American audience is imagining this guy skipping around his room. They're like, all right, he likes skipping.
Well, I mean, whatever floats your boat, right? So he was like, jump rope. So he was like, I probably do 15 minutes every day. I was like, 15 minutes, that's quite a lot. 15 minutes is quite a lot of skipping every day. What do you think you can do that every single day, 7 days a week? I was like, oh man, maybe I can do 10 minutes. I was like, and we had this back and forth until I whittled it down into 60 seconds. Like, you're going to skip for 60 seconds. You can promise yourself, hand on heart, if you miss a day, you lose 1,000 pounds. Let's put it that way. Really put like some money on the line here. It's like, okay, I can do 60 seconds every day. And now, like, he texts me, it's like, I've skipped for like 30 minutes a day for the last month.
That's amazing.
Because you just get into that mindset of like, I'm the person who skips. And so going back to the underrated, overrated, I think underrated is certainly exercise and simple forms of exercise. Overrated, I think, are the other activities that are certainly interesting, really exciting to hear about and talk about for sure on podcasts and stuff, but perhaps something that is reserved for a little bit later down your wellness journey.
Yeah, or maybe not at all, right?
Maybe, yeah.
But depends on the person that's
Absolutely,
there. But when you have those fundamentals, I think you also, when you identify, and this came later for me, we were chatting this weekend when we were getting together with my wife, and Rungan was there as well too. I didn't grow up in a household where, like most South Asians, where you saw people like working out on a regular basis, right? My brother-in-law, who you've met before, Dr. Neil Patel, he was always, even like in high school, and I kind of knew of him a little bit before him and my sister got married. He was the first person that I saw like really, that was like close to me, like consistently working out, like that was their identity. And I didn't really get the bug. I was inconsistent. I always played sports. I would hike, other things, but like real proper resistance training, I didn't for real get the bug until the last like couple years. And even then, when the pandemic happened and all the gyms closed in California, I really struggled with the whole working out at home thing. Yeah. I needed that sort of accountability.
Yeah.
And then last year I started working out with a group that actually started out in the United Kingdom. And they ultimately came to America, and they have a bunch of gyms over there. And I've gotten that identity. It's like part of my routine, at least 4 days a week. And it's become part of who I am.
Yeah.
And the craziest thing is that through doing all these incredible interviews with guests like yourself, you start connecting the dots that even for somebody like me, who's in the wellness space, not as an expert, but as somebody who gets to interview and talk to great people, you start connecting the dots that so many of the things that you're looking for in your diet, or maybe for some people who are listening through some miracle supplement or drug that they're waiting for, that all of those things are deeply connected to something like exercise, for instance. So, you've had on somebody like Jessie, the glucose goddess, before.
Yeah.
I love all the hacks.
Yeah.
She's a great interviewer. She has so many incredible things to teach people that you don't have to completely sacrifice and not enjoy the foods that you want. It's all about sequencing that right order so that you don't have this massive impact of glucose inside of the body all at once, which can have damaging effects. And one thing that I started noticing is I would regularly monitor my fasting insulin, my fasting, my continuous glucose monitoring. And when I started regularly and seriously started going to the gym and practicing resistance training, and also working on getting my VO2 max up and things like that I was tracking, even though my diet from the outside looked like I was having more carbs or more sugar or more this or that, all my numbers started to improve because I was focusing on these core basics. When you increase your strength, your muscle mass increases. When your muscle mass increases, your metabolic health increases, so on and so forth. So I saw this tweet the other day from Sachin Panda and his work, in circadian biology and sleep. And he was tweeting something about sleep. And he was saying that the best insurance, it's a review meta-analysis that came out recently. We'll link to it in the show notes. The best insurance against cancer that's out there is exercise. Like physical workout is the best insurance to significantly reduce your risk of cancer. So how many people listening to this podcast are interested in the topic of, cancer prevention? Might have had somebody in their family, unfortunately, I've had, that maybe either passed of cancer or has cancer now. And when you start pulling back these soft things, even for us in the wellness space, more and more information comes out every single year that these core basics are the key for everything that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those core basics, as unsexy as they sound, have like incredible pleiotropic effects. And what I mean by that is that they have multimodal effects. It's not just working on your muscles, it's also working on your insulin signaling, it's also working on your cardiovascular health, all these different elements. And I think, you know, to reduce the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I think to belittle the impact of exercise is something that we do quite colloquially. It's something that we generally don't pay enough attention to, just getting the core basics right. And I like to say to patients, like, before you even think about any of the other activities that you could potentially do, whether it be biohacking or sauna or whatever, let's just get the basics such to a level whereby it's become a habit. And that's when you get to go to the next level. You don't get to skip levels as you go ahead. There's an analogy in business, actually, a parallel in business, whereby I heard someone on a podcast and they're talking about paid ads. And you know, there's loads of different things that you can do within business when you're advertising a product or a service or whatever it is. You can put ads on Facebook, you can put ads on Instagram, Google, you can do in-person events, you could do tube ads or metro ads or whatever subway you have in the States. You could put your money in all these different areas, right? But really what you want to do is just focus on one pathway, one vertical where you just do your ads, you optimize those to a point whereby it's working, and then you go into a different ad network or ad service. It's the same thing with how we look after our bodies. You want to optimize your diet, you want to optimize your exercise, and once that's to a level, then you can experiment with all the other things. But don't run forward, don't go for the supplements, don't go for the sauna or the cold immersion therapy without really getting the basics right, because that's where all the magic happens. And that's where, like, my head's at. And going back to the sort of multimodal effects, I want to double down on things that have a multitude of effects. So diet's one, exercise is another, sleep we've just mentioned as well. And one of the other things that I think is underrated, I've got quite a few things that are underrated. One of the things that I think is underrated is simply mind wandering. So actually encouraging people to experience boredom, encouraging people to take themselves out of the rat race of looking at your phone or looking at your computer. You know, one of the benefits I think of doing a podcast is that it actually allows you to completely switch off. But one of the benefits of also going for a walk is that you actually increase and enhance creativity. It's a fantastic antidote to the stresses and the burdens of modern day living. And it's something that I think is really underrated and something that I'm trying to experience a lot more of myself. Just taking a walk.
Yeah.
And you know, there are phytochemicals in the air and stuff, and if you are lucky enough to be in a park, there's all these different benefits of forest bathing that a lot of Japanese researchers have been talking about for years. Shirinjuku, I think it's called, which is translated as forest bathing. But I think the effect of mind wandering as an activity can't be overstated enough, particularly in this point in our time where our attention is constantly being grabbed. I had this wonderful conversation with Johan Hari a couple of months ago, who's written a brilliant book called Stolen Focus. And it's all about how technology and the impact of our westernized diets and the impact of our culture is really focused on distracting us. Our attention is constantly being stolen. That's why it's called Stolen Focus. And one of the main things that we can do to encourage creativity, productivity, and space is simply going for a walk without any distractions and being alone. And when I put the spotlight on myself, which is something that I try and do more regularly, I realize that I'm constantly being entertained, whether it's via my AirPods, a podcast. Even when I'm in the gym, I'm entertaining myself whilst I'm in the gym. And I think we need to encourage ourselves to take regular breaks from that, because it's very easy to constantly be consuming information rather than just taking a break from it.
Yeah, and I think that the key word is just taking a break so that you can have that contrast. It's when you take a contrast, when you have a contrast, you have the natural ability to then say, okay, do I need more of this or that? A perfect example, I think like a couple of years ago when I was here, you were taking a coffee break, right? And this is something that I've done before in my own life. And the thing that I love about it, I've written a newsletter about it. We'll link to it in the show notes. The thing I love about a break from coffee, I love coffee. I have some coffee here that I'm drinking right now. But the thing I love about a coffee break is like anything that's quite stimulating, social media, over listening to health information, podcasts, the news, whatever it might be, it's easy for that to become part of our baseline. And we forget what we actually need more of or less of in our life. In particular with coffee, I noticed that amongst my friends, and even for myself, when I haven't taken a break from coffee, I tend to have coffee be one of the first liquids that I indulge in the day.
Right.
Forgetting to drink the amount of water that I need to make sure that I'm actually genuinely rehydrated so I can focus, so I can make sure that I have great bowel movements, so I can make sure all the things that happen with being properly hydrated. And when I was looking at the research, it was nuts. And I wrote all about this. Even a 1% drop in a 1% increase towards dehydration, so 1% drop in hydration has all these downstream effects inside of the body. But you forget and you can't tell, am I dehydrated or not? Especially, most people wake up, they drink a little bit of water, then they go immediately to get their coffee.
Yeah.
I kind of created this whole challenge, which is called the Morning Hydration Challenge. And it was kind of done to help people understand that actually you don't know how much water you need until you are appropriately hydrated. Yeah. And then you can get the rest of the amount of hydration you need during the day. So breaks are good because they allow us to reset. And I'm constantly thinking about in my own life, where do I need to create a little bit of boundaries for something so I can reset and appropriately, get back to my true baseline of health.
Totally, yeah. Two points on that. So I still do my coffee breaks at least once a year for 30 days. I really enjoy them. I think it's really important to take a break from anything that is stimulating. In that case, it's caffeine. I love the taste of coffee. I'm a proper coffee nerd. I only drink like really good quality coffee that's free of pesticides and molds and all the rest of it. And there's a particular brand that I drink they source beans from a high altitude because the crops are stressed a bit more. It's the hormetic effect. And so the coffee is actually grown to have higher amounts of polyphenols, which have those benefits that are transferred to us. So things like allergic acid, caffeic acids, all these different phytochemicals that provide benefits to us are heightened in the coffee, and they also medium roast as well, so as not to reduce the polyphenol content again. And they also have a decaf version, so I drink that for a month. And they take it out by the Swiss water method, which isn't using any chemicals or harsh extractants. So I drink that for a month, and the first couple of days is terrible, actually. I do get those withdrawals. I only drink 2 coffees a day generally, and I usually have one at the weekend. So I'm not like a prolific coffee drinker, and certainly not after 12 p.m. for me, because I've got slow half-life as a result of my genotype. But during that time period, I kind of prove to myself that I can live without this stimulant on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's important as well. Like, I'm not reliant on any one thing. And I would just have like a decaffeinated tea as well during that 30-day period. And I think it's important for everyone to sort of stress themselves in that way at least once a year, so you're not reliant on one thing. And the second point about hydration, I think it's another underrated thing. A lot of people reach for a coffee in the afternoons because they feel that they need that pick-me-up. Whereas in actual fact, if you listen to your body, generally it's because of dehydration in a lot of cases. We don't tend to consume enough water. And when you just think about the volume of our bodies as water, it's a huge amount. It's anywhere between 55 and 70% of our body weight. And so those small fluctuations in our hydration status can manifest in things like poor cognitive ability or feeling fatigued. And without having to do specific clinical tests like turgor pressure when you pinch your skin, or looking at your tongue, or blood pressure, or any of those fluctuations, just simply looking at the color of your urine and ensuring that it's straw colored is a really good indicator of light straw colored is a really good indicator of your hydration status. I had a conversation with 2 urologists actually on the podcast, specifically about renal stones. And the number one reason as to why people precipitate renal stones is because of poor hydration, which is why you see a peak of renal stones, kidney stones, in summer months, because we're not drinking enough and we're expelling and excreting water through sweat.
I think the best thing about, long format podcasts, social media, and the current state of the world is when, in a new way that maybe somebody hasn't heard before, also maybe hearing it from somebody that looks like them or they feel like they could relate to, or somebody, in your case, who's like a young, handsome doctor. It's like, wow, this thing that my mom, my friend, my person has been telling me, it's like I'm hearing it in a new way that gets me excited about doing it.
Yeah.
And when we can take those basics and almost in a way sort of be the cheerleader for the basics, like that's the best expression of social media, long form podcasts, because generally those basics are going to be low cost or no cost.
Totally.
And it's a slight modification on things that we're already spending time and money on, but we're going to get so much more value out of them. I'm going to toss out one, I know you have a few more things on the underrated.
Yeah.
I'm going to toss in a couple.
Yeah, go for it, man.
And I'd love to get your thoughts on them
Totally.
as well. So one thing that I think is underrated that I started doing last year as part of my workout training program, and I think is a very controversial thing for some people, but I think actually a good thing to do for a period of time, is actually tracking your calories.
Yeah.
And as somebody who is in the world of wellness, where so many people come on my podcast and are saying like, a calorie of broccoli is not the same as, a calorie of Coca-Cola. Yeah. Yes, of course that's true. Calories are not just calories. And yet, because we live in this world of processed foods and ultra processed foods, even in the health industry, you end up, because these foods are so hyper palatable, overeating on things that you have no idea on, and under-eating on certain things that you also have no idea on, like fiber, for example.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have no freaking clue how much fiber they're having.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about calories just for body composition and weight, although if somebody is struggling with that and they feel like they've been doing a lot of the basics that are there, I do think it's an area to look at.
Yeah.
Right? Energy balance and total consumption of calories does have an impact on weight that's there. And for people in the health industry in particular, I think that they would benefit so much for at least like 2 to 3 weeks of tracking their calories, looking at a few big things, looking at sugar, carbohydrates, looking at fat, looking at protein, and to look at where they might be just based on however they want to eat, whatever their diet is, whether they're vegan or they want to do a ketogenic diet or this or that, to actually see is how they're eating, even as a first layer, matching how they think that they're eating.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Not even telling you what you should eat or what you shouldn't eat.
Yeah.
Is it matching that based on the food that you're eating? One thing that I found last year is that, in particular for me, somebody who grew up vegetarian and then was vegan for like 7 years, that even though I don't eat that way now, people can eat however they want to, I was significantly under eating on protein.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have thought that was the case because I had stopped being vegetarian and vegan, which obviously you can get proteins, through plant sources. And there's great resources that we've talked about in the past on that. But I was so significantly under eating on protein that I had no clue until I started tracking. So that is something that obviously there's a lot of layers to that. And, but I think in the wellness world in particular, it's a good thing to do for a specific amount of time just to get an understanding of where you're actually eating from. For a lot of my friends right now who swear, like you hear this sort of this, you hear this a lot from people saying, I've literally been trying everything. And I have a friend right now, a dear close friend of mine. He's like, yeah, man, like, I've been doing everything. I've been doing this, that. I can't actually, in his particular case, he does want to lose some weight and drop, improve his body composition. I was like, genuinely, like, have you actually tracked the total quantity of fat that you're eating because it's so easy to overeat on fat.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're demonizing fat. There's plenty of healthy fats that are out there. But in particular for him, I thought that might have been something. And as he started tracking, he saw that he was astonished to see just from a couple of processed foods here or there, the total quantity of fat that he was having. And just by changing that by about 10 to 15%, he actually was able to start to lose a little bit of weight, in combination with him working out and all this other stuff that he was doing previously. So I think calorie tracking is something that I would say is underrated for a temporary period of time.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to give you my hot takes on that. So this definitely parallels to the other thing that I was going to talk about, which is underrated, which paradoxically is wearables and tracking in general, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And I think there's definitely benefits for a whole bunch of different metrics that we can measure for a short amount of time. Calories, I feel like I've gone full circle around on this, right? So before, when I was at med school, everything was about calories. It was about macros, calories, muscle building, basically the men's health version of nutrition school. That's basically like was my knowledge of calories, and I was like drinking the calorie Kool-Aid. That was me. It was all about calories. And then when you start learning a bit about the absorbable calories from different types of foods, the impact on your insulin response, on the other markers that lead to weight loss and weight gain, calories diminish in their importance. That was, I think, pretty fashionable now today to think of calories as not mattering at all within the wellness space. I think there is a really nice middle ground, which you've articulated beautifully, in that calories do matter to an extent, but there is a lot of variation between how one consumes food and how they absorb the calories from said food. And so our ability to absorb the energy from nuts is going to be different based on our microbiota, based on our current weight status, based on our stresses and the hormone levels. But as a general rule of thumb, understanding the total calories consumed in a 24-hour period over a couple of weeks, I think does have those tangible benefits, because it gives you a ballpark idea of just how much energy you are consuming as an individual. And so for a period of time, whether it be a couple of weeks, I think it is good to note that. And actually, this is something I did a couple of years ago, and I realized I was actually consuming quite a bit of calories. It was around 3,000 calories per day, but I was also exercising quite a bit. So it kind of matched out. And that's why I wasn't having big fluctuations in my weight. During COVID, on the other hand, I was working in hospital pretty much full time. And what did I do when I came home? I'd reach for sugary items because I was comfort eating. I'd be having a lot more alcoholic drinks, probably to take the stress off a bit, not like a huge amount, but a wine or two a night, which is a lot more than I drink right now, which is pretty much rarely. And all those things definitely have an impact. And it is certainly true to say certain foods with their calorie content will have more of a detrimental impact on your body. Outside of the calorie counts itself, the sugar content, the form in which the food is being consumed, whether it be through a sugar sweetened beverage, it's impossible to compare like a can of soda with a broccoli in calorie for calorie. I think that's a very naive way of looking at it. But there are merits to understanding your general calorie balance. And I think another thing that is underrated is the food matrix. And that's where the calorie counting alone doesn't really provide as much information as it should do. And the food matrix, just to give a very crude example, is a whole nut versus pounded nuts or like a nut powder versus a smooth like nut butter. Those are going to have different impacts on your body in terms of the absorbability of the fats into your bloodstream and the absorbability of the energy contained within the nut itself. You're going to absorb less of the calories in its whole form than you are in the smooth nut butter form. And that over time will have an impact. So I agree. I think counting calories for a small amount of time to give you a general ballpark figure whilst appreciating the food matrix and whilst appreciating the quality of those calories, gives people a better, a richer understanding, particularly if they are interested in weight gain, weight loss, and weight maintenance.
Absolutely. We're surrounded by energy in the form of food, which is always available to us. And our genetics are programmed and our biology is programmed to seek this out.
Yeah.
And because we have so much abundance around us in largely the Western world, which is being exported all around the world, even in countries like India, where they're dealing with obesity and diabetes, it's super fast growing. So this is a global problem now, energy abundance. And in a way, if we don't take inventory, it's just too easy to let our palate dictate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if our diet is still, focused on a lot of processed foods.
And I think, the discussion around calories does lack nuance on both sides, right? So from the health professional point of view, it doesn't appreciate the benefits of calorie counting to give people an overall picture of what their diet is, particularly if they're interested in weight loss or weight gain. And on the flip side, typically personal trainers, gym goers, people who are in the bodybuilding community, they probably overstate the use of calories to, magnify the impact on things like type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, insulin resistance. We can't just look at calories in isolation. There is nuance to this. There is like a middle way that I think, your podcast and long form conversation in general adds a lot more color to the discussion that is otherwise lost in like a tweet or a headline or, someone talking about it in a 15-second clip on Instagram or TikTok. And I think just to add a little bit more clarity to the calorie discussion, a calorie deficit 100% helps people lose weight. Absolutely. There's no way in which anyone can argue that. But there are degrees in which you can tailor your calorie deficit to improve the long-term goal, which is weight loss over a longer time period. So if you were to drastically drop your calories, let's say by 20%, your body literally goes into starvation mode, and you'll find that typical plateau around 90 days, whereby you don't lose any more weight because your body is literally fighting losing any more weight. And then what typically happens is when you eat according to your normal diet prior to when you went on the calorie deficit diet, is you actually increase your weight. And this is a well-known phenomenon. No one really can argue against this. And that's why I think there are benefits in something called interval weight loss, which is where you reduce your calories by a very, very small amount. You experience and coast out that plateau. And then when your body is adjusted to that, then you reduce it slightly again if you're trying to get to a lower weight maintenance point. That is less sexy because it's not like you can advertise that as lose weight in 60 days and, make a plan around it. But it is definitely a lot more effective if the aim is long-term weight loss, which is, I would argue, most people's issue.
And I'm sure there's a huge behavioral change component there too. It's very easy to do something drastic for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Think about these television shows like The Biggest Loser.
Yeah.
Right? It's not easy. It's still a lot of hard work. But to keep up that same regimen of working out or dramatically cutting calories for the long haul is a lot tougher. So I'm sure as part of what you were just explaining there, one of the aspects is the behavioral aspect of being able to stick to something consistently to improve your body composition, whether it's adding muscle or losing weight or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Which, nutrition is one part of it, but of course goes back to what we were talking about before. Exercise and working out is another part of it as well.
Totally. Yeah. And, there are definitely there's the impact of sleep as well and stress levels. All these things can impact cortisol, your body's ability to regulate sugar. It has a huge impact, and there is definitely the behavioral impact of, the hormones that judge satiety and your food-seeking behavior, and I think generally there is a lot more to be had from tracking your metrics, and so this goes into the other thing that I think is underrated. considering that I've just talked about the very basic things like exercise and diet, it might surprise people to think of wearables, things like Oura rings or Fitbits or continuous glucose monitors. But I think for short periods of time, they do add a lot more color to how your body is reacting to things like exercise and different diets. And it gives you, what I've observed, behavioral change motivation. So when people understand, oh, when I have that chocolate bar, my sugar spikes, and that leads to this cascade of issues in my body, and that might be explaining these results that I see in my bloods or this number that I see in my scales. It adds a lot more of that motivation to change said behavior. And almost, I'm reticent to use this word gamify, but the gamification of your health is something that can prove useful in the short term, and it leads to overall habit change. I've certainly noticed that myself. When I started tracking my sleep, I had a lot more onus to change things that improve my sleep. Things like not eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, things like not having alcoholic drinks too late in the evening, and things like making sure that I am not checking social media late at night. Things that I think are really, really hard to change, but with the motivation that I had from my sleep tracking, it was game changing. It was absolutely game changing. And a lot of people have noticed the same things with all the different wearables that give metrics to us and are a lot more accessible these days.
Yeah, I love it. I'm a big fan. We've done a bunch of episodes. I know you have too, so we can link to some of those below. Anything else in the category of overrated or underrated that you feel very passionate about right now before we move on to the next topic?
I think in the same vein as trying to opt into things that have multimodal effects, supplements I think are overrated in a few areas. So with the exception of a few, I always look at omega-3, vitamin D, iron, particularly for menstruating women, as things that we should definitely have checked and ensure that you're optimizing, because they have a huge number of different downstream effects. But I think targeted specific supplements before you cover the basics can be overrated. And the reason why I say that is because I've had a number of instances where people have come to clinic and they've used a particular supplement in the hope that it will reduce their blood pressure or it will reduce their sugar spikes, for example. And they're not doing the basics. They're not getting the basic things right. They haven't changed the diet. They haven't made a considered effort to improve lean muscle mass, for example, so you can better dispose of your glucose when it's in circulation. Those are the things that are going to have drastic effects, not the supplements. So whilst I appreciate that, there are some studies and there are certain supplements that can have benefits. I think people try to jump to the supplement route a little bit quicker than is otherwise advisable. And I'd always say, let's start with the underrated stuff that we talked about first before we get to the stuff that I think is a lot more downstream. If you enjoyed that video, you'll love the library of content that we have on thedoctorskitchen.com. Make sure you hit subscribe, and we have podcasts in our library on brain health, well-being, supplements, and lots more. Have a wonderful day.